Hey everyone, I'm Matthew,
I'm Daniel, and my name is Mark.
and today we're going to talk about athlete burnout. So, just to give an overview of the topic, we're going to start with some causes of burnout in youth, college, and pro sports, and then we'll go to the effects at all levels, and then we'll talk about solutions. So, we will start off with what causes burnout in youth sports. There was a journal article released in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, and the conclusion that this article came to was that there are three core causes of burnout, specifically within youth sports. The first core cause was emotional and physical exhaustion. This is one of the first signs to see if a young athlete is getting burnt out in a sport. With the competitive culture that has been created in youth sports in the past 20 years, it has led to people wanting these kids to win instead of just participate. And this can lead to coaches having highly intensive practices or just too many practices. And overtraining in young athletes is important because most don't have the physical development to handle it, and it can easily lead to increased fatigue levels. The second cause of burnout in youth sports is having a reduced level of accomplishments. When individual athletes and teams don't reach their goals and expectations, whether that's in practice or competitions, it can be frustrating. This is common from youth sports all the way up to pro sports, but it especially plays a factor in leading to burnout when talking about young athletes. The competitive culture that has been created in youth sports also plays a factor in why kids get burnt out from not reaching their goals. This culture of winning instead of participation leads to these kids having lofty expectations that are placed on them from themselves and their coaches. And when kids don't reach these expectations, it can just be demotivating to them. This is very prevalent in kids who specialize in sports, since they're putting so much time and effort just into one sport. Not meeting their expectations can easily lead to frustration and burnout. So, the last cause of burnout in youth sports is sport devaluation. This cause is also a byproduct of the highly intensive culture of winning instead of participation in youth sports. Sport devaluation is when young athletes start to mentally distance themselves from the sport instead of staying engaged. It's a coping mechanism that many young athletes use to protect themselves from feeling that pressure of having to reach all of their goals. And it happens slowly over time, where it may just start with not being excited to go to a practice every now and then, but then it will eventually evolve to where they stop putting in effort in practice and competition, and they ultimately just stop caring about that sport. And this is one of the most dangerous causes of burnout in youth sports because once kids reach that end stage of not caring about sports anymore, it's very hard to get them engaged again, and they might end up just not playing sports altogether. So, next, we're going to talk about some of the effects from burnout in youth sports. So, one of the effects of burnout is an increased risk of injury. Like I mentioned previously, specializing in a sport at a young age is a contributing factor to burnout, and there is a study done linking this to increased injury. The study had over 1,000 athletes ranging from ages 7 to 18 and ended up showing that specialized athletes were at a greater risk of injury compared to non-specialized athletes. The repetitive motions and the use of the same muscles and ligaments year round doesn't allow them to rest, which is why there is an increased risk of overuse injuries. There are some very common examples too when thinking about these injuries, such as like Tommy John for baseball and then tennis elbow for tennis players. And this is important, especially in youth sports, because if young athletes have to deal with these injuries at an early age, it minimizes their chances of being able to play sport at the next levels. So, the next effect of burnout in youth sports is its impact on mental health. When kids get burnt out in a sport, it can lead to many negative consequences that will impact their mental health. Burnout can lead to less motivation, and it can lessen how much a kid cares about a sport. In many instances, this can lead to a young athlete becoming depressed. This is because they stopped enjoying one of the things that they used to love doing. The impact on their mental health can also lead to things like decreased performance in the classroom. So, when a young athlete is mentally and physically exhausted, it's not something that they can just turn off when a practice or a game is over. That fatigue follows them into school, and it can lead to problems with their focus, their memory, and their engagement in class. Their ability to complete assignments drops, and their test performances could also suffer. And beyond academics, their mood and social relationships at school can take a hit too. The negative impacts on their mental health could make them more irritable and cause them to start withdrawing themselves from certain social situations. The next effect of burnout is that negative practice and game atmosphere. So when either one or multiple athletes on a team are experiencing burnout, it changes the environment and the team dynamics. The first thing that can happen in practices and games is they stop being fun and enthusiastic, and it starts to feel like a chore instead of something that these kids want to participate in. It can also cause teammates to become disconnected and lose that special bond that most teams have. Teammates could start to become impatient with their players and not performing well, and ultimately it will just cause a rift in the team. And some coaches will worsen this environment by putting too much pressure on their athletes by not giving them a chance to just relax and have fun. The last effect of burnout that can have is that kids will ultimately quit sports. When athlete burnout is not addressed or taken seriously, these kids will reach a point where they just can't deal with the physical and mental aspects of being burnt out, which is ultimately what will lead them to quit. The pressure and expectations they face aren't worth it to them anymore at that point. So, as I've talked about some of the causes and effects of burnout in youth sports, it's clear that it's a complex issue with many factors that can be detrimental to kids. But the good news is that there's ways to minimize and eliminate burnout in youth sports. So, the first solution to minimize burnout is to decrease specialization. As I talked about previously, specialization is just when athletes focus intensely on a single sport year round, and it often excludes them from being able to play other sports or just pursue other hobbies. While it may seem like a path to development themselves for like high school and college levels, it's not needed to fully develop an athlete. Encouraging multi-sport participation is important because it helps young athletes discover what they like and don't like. A kid may end up falling in love with a sport that they didn't expect to because they had the opportunity to play it. And it also will develop different muscle groups, it will reduce their repetitive strain, and it will just make them a more complete athlete overall. So instead of pushing year-round club teams on an athlete by the time they're like age 10, we should be telling kids to try out different sports. Now, the next two solutions are closely related to each other and help build off of each other to minimize burnout. These two solutions are to create a positive training environment and to focus on participation and development. There was a study done that had athletes answer a questionnaire, and the results show that they had that having a positive and supporting training environment led to increased athlete satisfaction and lower burnout among athletes. To do this, there needs to be more of an emphasis on participation instead of winning. Young kids are still developing and learning how to play sports, so there does not need to be added pressure for them to try to win. Instead, there should be an environment where these kids feel like it's okay to make mistakes. This means coaches need to be more than just instructors. They need to be more mentors that understand that these young athletes are not there to just win. The feedback that they give these players should focus more on giving enough effort, improving, and their personal growth rather than just what they can do to win. And along those same lines, mistakes should not be treated as punishments, but instead learning opportunities. And it's also not just the coaches that need to shift their mindset. Parents also play a major role in creating this environment. When parents emphasize performance over process and results over effort, they unintentionally contribute to the pressure. But when they show consistent support and emphasize enjoyment and effort, they help reduce the chances of that kid feeling burnt out. Now, the last solution to minimize burnout is to balance training and rest. This is the simplest solution, but it's often one of the most important and overlooked elements to help minimize burnout in youth sports. Young athletes are still growing and developing, and they can't handle as much physical and mental stress as older athletes can. That's why coaches need to be very conscious of how many practices they're having and how intense they are. It's very common, especially in specialized club sports where the training schedules are just too intense. One way balancing training and rest helps these young athletes is that it reduces the risk for overuse injuries. And as we were talking about before, these injuries can be detrimental to the physical development of kids. So trying to reduce this risk is important. And it's also not just about their physical recovery, though, but it's about their mental and emotional recovery. Um, Long and intensive practices can put mental strains on young athletes, and making sure that these kids are able to recover from that is just as important as their physical health.
So I'm doing burnout in college sports and just some facts about college sports. And the NCAA specifically, there's roughly about 500,000, if not 520,000. So just touching almost roughly over half a million student athletes in each division from Division One, Division Two, and Division Three. So in most NCAA divisions, there's roughly about 600 to 700 student athletes in Division One, 500 to 400 in Division Two, and then 300 to 400 in Division Three. Usually the numbers tend to differ. It all depends on the divisions, but usually it's known that Division One has more students, and then Division Two and Division Three trickling just a little bit under Division One. But yeah, so there are also many college athletes who are in Olympians, mainly in the sports like track and field and swimming. The most notable one I can tell you off the top of my head is Quincy Wilson, who's actually in high school, not college. But I just find it interesting that they're throughout all levels of like professional athletes. There's different divisions of student athletes who can come and play for the Team USA, which I thought was pretty dope. And then there has also been more representation for women's in college sports ever since the Title VI has been passed to give equal opportunities for women's. And so it roughly jumped from 300,000 to almost 200,000 in women athletes. So for burnout in college athletes, there's an extensive list when it comes to that, but I just chose these five because I feel like these five stand out amongst the rest, which is overtraining and physical demands, academic pressure, pressure to perform, little to no social life, and injury and recovery challenges. So for effects of burnout at the collegiate level, we have overtraining and physical demands. So it's obviously known that college athletes have an extensive schedule when it comes to waking up around, I'd say sometimes 5 a.m. in the morning and not being able to get into bed until like 9 p.m. So usually that also leads to like physical decline and just decrease in performance. There's also academic pressure. So while juggling their athletic calendar, they also have to maintain a certain GPA. So once the GPA starts to decline, they obviously can't play sports. They have to maintain that certain GPA. So that also gives a decline in mental health aspect because they feel like they're juggling too many things at once. There's also the fear of high expectations, so like the pressure to perform. So you also have teammates and coaches and other people like well family members counting on you to actually succeed and be good in the sport that you're playing, so that obviously comes with a sense of like overwhelming pressure that usually people fold underneath. There's also injury and recovery challenge. So it's a normal thing for players to get injured, and obviously once players get injured, I think it's that fear and that toll that takes on players when they have to come back and obviously challenge themselves to come back to what they were playing before. Usually, you can see a decline in performance when certain players come back from, uh, if I would say, like season-ending injuries. So, and usually they tend not to perform like the same way they used to play before because obviously they're afraid of re-injuring themselves. And little to no social life. And on the same concept of like having extensive training schedules, there's little to no access for student athletes to go out and have fun and do what they usually do. So it's usually they tend to feel like they're missing out on the college experience of what college should be like because they're obviously just playing their sport 24/7, 7 days a week. So that's also another effect of college burnout. So for solutions, there's rest and recovery. So obviously, giving college athletes certain periods of time to be able to recuperate and actually have some adequate sleep also helps with both physical and mental recovery because obviously they cannot perform at their best if they're physically exhausted. So giving rest recovery is an important thing. There's also 24-hour mental health support. So giving college athletes uh, the chance to be able to speak with psychologists and counseling services can help athletes deal with stress and emotional challenges. Because obviously, without 24-hour mental health support, athletes tend to obviously suffer from depression and even worse than burnout. It could lead to the most extensive, which would be suicide. So having 24-hour mental health support would be obviously a great demand. Open communication, I feel like that also falls hand in hand with 24-hour mental health support. So besides having to talk to a psychologist, I feel like athletes should be able to talk to their coaches. I feel like that should be like the first line of defense is to be able to openly have a discussion with your coach and tell them how you're feeling and be on the same hand in hand and know what you guys are feeling and to be also be supportive of amongst a person that's supposed to be looking out for you and make sure and wishing the best for you. There's also rehab and injury prevention programs. So with most colleges, they have state of the art rehab programs because obviously it's a normal thing for athletes to get injured. So being able to go through proper rehabilitation and then come back to be able to play the sport that they love would also reduce the long-term stress and injuries and overall lower the chance of them getting re-injured by the same injury that they had before. There's also development programs. So it's known that not every college student is going to go out to play in professional sports. So be having them being able to have the chance to like go out and further their career and become like lifelong citizens and like figure out what they want to do outside of college once they're done with that is probably one of the best things they can have at their disposal.
All right, I'm Daniel. I'll be going over the professional burnout of this presentation. Some facts. Professional average age for a professional athlete is 36 years old. There are around 5,498 professional athletes in the United States alone, which I expect that number to be massive on the world scale, but I can unfortunately there's a number for that. And of those 5,498 professional athletes in the United States, 38.4% of them are women and 61.6% of them are men. Then the average career for a professional athlete is around 3 to 5 years. All right, some burnout. Some athlete burnout. So obviously, I think it leads to athletes playing too many games. In a study shown from the 2002 World Cup, there's around 32% of players who performed below their average level during that World Cup, and it was because they had played more matches than rest throughout that World Cup. Um, and then in another study, 10% of athletes experienced regular burnout throughout their season. And then another study, I found 35% of those professional athletes experience mental health problems, which is pretty high for our professional athletes who we hold a higher standard to and look up to from these younger athletes as well. And then 81% of burnout for athletes was influenced by training factors, and 75% said the biggest factor was their environment, which if they're training, if they're getting burnt out just from their trainings and their environment that they're in, how do we expect them to play all these games and make sure that they're staying healthy and making sure that they're that role model that we look up to? The effect of burnout. So the three main effects I have are increase in injuries, mental effects, and substance problems. The beginning one of the increase in injuries, 60% of retired football players have experienced symptoms of osteoarthritis, which is a direct consequence of high impact that athletes experience in football. And that goes for almost every sport you can name of basketball, soccer, hockey, football. You got baseball and softball, and all volleyball, all those professional sports. These retired athletes are coming back burnt out, or even during they're retiring early, not having those long careers that we like to see and hope to see, like those 3 to 5 year professional careers because of these issues of osteoarthritis and other injuries that could be coming up with major injuries like tears in muscles and broken bones and stuff like that. And then our mental effects, up to 45% of professional athletes report symptoms of anxiety, which is very high for me. I think that lots of players suffer from this because lots of our professional athletes suffer from this because of the amount of games they have to play, the amount of stress that's put on them to hold that high level of play that that all these people look up to, and the level that they have to play at. And then our substance problems, around 12% of NFL players engage in misuse of opioids, and that's because of all those increased injuries and mental effects. They're looking for a way out or a way of getting rid of these problems, and they're led to these misuse of drugs because no one's guiding them and no one's showing them how to properly take on burnout as a professional athlete and as a person in the real world, which is a problem for burnout. So some solutions, bringing the total amount of games down for professional athletes, just in about every sport. Baseball's at 140 games, 142 games, I believe. Hockey's at 82. Same with basketball. NFL's at 17, which they're looking to bring on the 18 game season as well. And soccer's upwards of 70 to 90 games for a season. So bringing those total amount of games down would be something that would very well handle burnout a lot, because they won't be stressing through a very long period of the year instead of a shorter amount for these professional athletes, which will lead to less injuries, less mental problems, and obviously bring down then that substance abuse for sure. Another solution would be creating a balanced training schedule. I think that since these players are playing so many games, they need to look at their training schedule differently and come up with a different training schedule that is more relaxing and not as high toll, even though they have to maintain that level of fitness, obviously, and maintain that mental sharpness. But obviously, as we've seen, it's more bringing down that mental sharpness instead of bringing it up as it should be. And then creating avenues for mental health. I think creating programs and creating ways to show that it's okay to speak out about your mental problems, and that if you need to seek help, of course, it's here, and having programs so it's easy for these athletes to reach out and take care of those problems. And then creating an environment that allows athletes to enjoy the sport. As said earlier, one of the biggest leading factors for mental health is their environment wasn't suitable for them or wasn't positive or anything. And I think making sure that we're creating that environment in those clubhouses or in those training facilities is something they need to do in order to make sure that physically and mentally that the athletes are taken care of, and taking rest when needed. The big story is that in the NBA, the commissioner said that players aren't eligible for end of the year awards, increase the bonuses. Um, when if they don't play a certain amount of games, and a lot of our big stars aren't can't reach those games because they're putting so much stress on them, playing so many minutes, and they're getting injured or they're taking mental health breaks, and because of that they're not allowed to get those end of the year awards and bonuses. So if we are taking away that time and rest that they need, then obviously they aren't going to be fit, and they aren't going to get those awards, and it doesn't really give them an incentive then as well. So, conclusion: professional athletes and professional athletes suffer burnout from physical and mental sides of the game. These effects can lead to substance abuse problems in all types of sports and in different ways. So, I think some solutions to these are creating stress-free environments, having athletes speak up about rest and their mental problems, and then finding different avenues for athletes through mental health programs, through their leagues and through their teams, and substance use programs for those that are retired after playing as well. And here's our work session.
Yep, and then that's the end of our presentation. Thanks for watching.